All right, so this is going to be an explanation video on how to deal with null pointer exceptions and just giving you a couple other Eclipse goodies as we go along. All right, so the first thing that I want you to notice is just, assuming that you have the fraction class kind of, done somewhat. Here I have this test fraction class, and we're just going to go ahead and do a very simple, fraction f1 right here, where I'm declaring a variable f1 of type fraction. And I'm going to go ahead and just say something like f1.get denominator. Notice that as I'm doing this, Eclipse is automatically giving me suggestions. If I want to accept the suggestion, I can just go ahead and press enter, which I'm going to go ahead and do right now, and then put that semicolon there at the end. And then after that, I'm just going to do a quick little system.out.println. So one other thing that you want is if you kind of forget certain things, but it starts with something, you can always use the control space option. So I'm going to go ahead and just do that right now. I'm going to hit control space. Then I could say system, and you can see that it's there. And then I could say something like dot, and then you can kind of go through it, and you can see that there's lots of different options that they end up giving you there. So that's something that you can always kind of use at any point as you're typing through to get suggestions. Now, one thing that you'll immediately notice right now is that we're getting some red squiggly lines, which are just some errors, right? If I end up hovering over one of these errors, we could see that it says the local variable f1 may not have been initialized. So I'll go ahead and just jump over here and initialize that variable and click on it. Now, the quick fixes are usually pretty nice for you, and sometimes you just kind of blindly start following them, but you do want to pay attention to what it's or how it's trying to fix it for you. It's really nice that Eclipse has all of these features built in, but we do kind of want to pay attention to what it's doing. And if you notice here, what it's doing is that it's just setting f1 to be null. Right? And so one thing that's going to end up happening is if we set it to be null and then we try and call get denominator on f1, right? f1 is null. So that means that there's nothing there. It's completely empty. It's not pointing anywhere. And so if we try and then go to that address, that null address, we're going to end up raising what in Java is called the null pointer exception, which is slightly different than in C++, right? In C++, we would end up getting something where it would crash the machine, or it would, we'd get some type of message there. But here, Java's going to kind of gracefully tell us, hey, you know what? There's something that I think is kind of wrong that I want you to take a closer look at, okay? And so in order for us to do that, I'm going to go ahead and just save the program, and then we're going to go ahead and just run it. I'm going to end up using these play buttons. There are keyboard shortcuts that you can try and use. Control F11 will run this play button here. You can also do an Alt-Shift-X and then do J, but I'll just go ahead and press this button for now. So let's go ahead and do that, and then you can see now that we have this kind of explanation down here, this java.lang.nullPointer exception. It's essentially telling you what the exception is, and then it's giving you the line where that exception occurs. So one of the nice things is that in this case, it's really simple. Sometimes you get some scary looking exception messages that look a lot longer and they have a lot more lines on them. But in this one, we just have it be the very first one, and that's kind of the place where it stops. So usually you want to take a look at the line, that's your code that is the most accessible at the top, okay, or the most recent, the one that's highest up. So we'll go ahead and click on that, and then that will take us to this particular line. And so what you want to do anytime that you get a null pointer exception and you kind of reach one of these lines, the biggest thing for you to realize is that if you have any dots or any type of array accesses or anything like that, whatever's to the left of that is most likely what's going to be null, okay? And so in this case, right, we have this dot operator and we have get denominator, and the only thing that's to the left of that dot is f1. So we know immediately that f1 is null, which is kind of trivial, but just that is sort of the process that you want to take when you get a null pointer exception. Essentially, Java is letting you know, hey, this f1 is null, and it's null right here. And afterwards, you're trying to do something with a null object, which is not a good idea. All right. And so, at this point, this is where we would want to, instead of having it be null, we would actually want to create a fraction object. So we can go ahead and just say something like new fraction 2, 3, for example, right? And we'll go ahead and write that, and I'll go ahead and just save that and then run this again. And when we do that, we're going to end up getting, a fraction object down here at the bottom where it's going to say fraction at, and then it's going to give us an address, okay? This is the address of where that fraction object is located in memory, okay? So that's what this is a number. I know that it has letters in here, but it's just doing it, expressing it in hexadecimal format. All right, so since this is what it's printing out, the other thing that you should know is that if you ended up following the Intro to Java Lab that I ended up giving out, this would, rather than printing out the type and the address, it would actually print out something like 2/3, right? I didn't end up overwriting that in this particular example. But, you know, just wanted to kind of get you through some of these main exceptions and stuff. So let's keep going. So the next thing I want to kind of approach is, let's say that we want to create an array, okay? So I'm going to go ahead and do an array right here where I'm going to call a fraction array. And the way that we do that is we just do something like the fraction followed by the square brackets and then the name of the array. If I end up saying something like this, right, all this is going to do is it's going to let Eclipse or let Java know, hey, if you ever see the words ARR, know that that is an array. Okay. And if you guys remember working with arrays, right, one of the things that we might end up thinking about is we might end up wanting to do something like say, okay, I want to do ARR brackets here, and I want to put F1 in there, okay? If this is something that you would like to do, well, we can kind of go ahead and do that. However, again, one of the things that we haven't done is we haven't initialized it. So if we try and initialize the variable again and then try and run this, I'm going to just save and then run here. We're going to end up, again, getting another null pointer exception. And this time it's going to be on line 8, okay? And so in addition to sort of these dot operations, you also want to take a look at any square operations or anything like that. One thing that you guys might get confused on is you might think, oh, here's ARR. There's also this F1. Which one of these is null? You know, because you sort of, there might be, you know, certain things where you think, oh, which one's null, right? And so to figure that out, easiest way to do that is to, when you get a null pointer exception, if you get one and you get this red text, the other thing that you can do is if you're not really sure which one is going to be null, you can end up using this debug button up here. Now let's go ahead and click this button, and in my version it's going to automatically jump. In yours you might get a window that says, oh, this you know, perspective is associated with the debug perspective. Would you like to switch now? You want to just say yes and then have it remember your decision. In my case, I'm just going to go ahead and just hit the debug. It's going to automatically switch over. If you ever want to switch back, you can go ahead and just click this this button up here, this little J button, or you can hit the window and then go to perspective, and then you can open up perspective and you can go back to the Java one, for example. But there is this nice little J button up here, so I can do that, and then you can notice that I just immediately switched back. You should also know that, though, that your test fraction class is still running. The program is still running, so if you ever want to stop it, you want to make sure that you terminate it here, okay? That is another thing that you might want to make sure that you do anytime that you run it. Make sure that you terminate it, because then if you try and edit the code, you're going to end up getting messages from Eclipse telling you that, you know, hot code replace failed or something like that. And we want to just avoid that. We want to avoid those things. But here, one of the nice things is you can take a look here. Here's kind of that same kind of message that you would get in red text, right? It's telling you it's a null pointer exception. It's telling you what line you are at, so you can click on that line and it'll jump you down here to that green line. And then the other thing that's nice is that here you end up seeing the two variables, and you can see the different values for those variables. And you can immediately see that ARR in this situation is null. Okay, so what we want to do is, just like we end up doing with the fraction class, what we did with F1, we're going to go ahead and terminate and then switch back to the Java perspective. Just like we had new fraction 2, 3, what we have to do here is we have to allocate the fraction array. Doing something like this where we can say new 10. And just to kind of show you what it's going to look like as well, I'm going to go ahead and just put a breakpoint here. And the way that I'm going to do that is by double-clicking on this end. You see how that ends up coming there? Once we do that, we're going to put one on line 8, and I'm going to go ahead and hit this debug button again. If I hit the play button, it's going to ignore this point right here, okay? But what this point is essentially saying is that if we run the program in debug mode, I want you to stop at this line, okay? And if I want to take away that breakpoint, again, I just go ahead and double-click on it, and it goes away. But I'm going to go ahead and just double-click there and then hit the little bug button. And the reason I want to do that is just to show you what exactly happens when we do new fraction 10. If I go ahead and click the down arrow for ARR, what you'll notice is that new fraction 10 has, what it has done is that it has created space for 10 fractions, okay? However, what you'll notice is that each one of the elements from 0 to 9 is null, okay? And so what that means is that we would actually have to specify which one of those we would like, you know, something to happen in. So This ends up becoming important because some of you might end up thinking, oh, if I kind of go back to my Java perspective, I end up saying something like arr.0.set denominator, okay? And I might want to set the denominator to be 4, for example. If I do something like this, right, and I run this again, and I'm going to run this in debug mode just to kind of show you how nice it is, you immediately get jumped over to, hey, this is a null pointer exception at this particular line, and then you can start to take a look to see what these different values are, right? So you can maybe take a look to say, well, not null, but ARR0 is null, okay? And then that would be what would cause the null pointer exception. To make sure that we get around that, what you want to do is simply just move up this particular line here where we end up doing ARR0 equals F1. And then afterwards, we can then set the denominator to be 4. And that would actually change F1's denominator, as we can see right now. So I'm going to, again, go ahead and use the denominator here. We're going to go ahead and set the denominator, and then you'll be able to see how it works. And I'm going to go ahead and use that debugger. One other thing that I want you guys to know is in this case, notice this little star here. This means that I have not saved testtraction.java. When you do that, Eclipse is automatically going to ask you, do you want to save the resources? Okay. And in this situation, I do want to save the resources. But what you want to do is you always want to save resources before launching. So the next time that you end up getting this window, just do yourself a favor and click that checkbox so that way you don't ever have to worry about getting this little window again. Essentially, it's if you want to run it and you kind of edit it, you definitely want to save that. Okay. So you can go ahead and click that checkbox and then click OK. And then it's going to go ahead and run over here. We have this breakpoint. What I want to show you is that in this case, we've created F1, we've created ARR, and we've set F1 to be at ARR0. Okay. By doing that, what you'll notice is that we have F1 and then we have array sub 0. Array sub 0 is no longer null, right? The one thing I want you to take a look at is to take a look over here at this ID. This ID is essentially the address. If you look at it, the ID 18, the address for it, is the exact same one as 18, okay? So that essentially means that they're both pointing to the exact same place, okay? You'll notice there that they both have that denominator. And what I'm gonna do is just make this a little bit bigger over here just so that we can see that. And so one thing that's gonna end up happening is that if I decide to kind of move to the next, if I decide to move to the next line here, where I end up setting the denominator to 4, okay? I'm going to end up doing that by clicking this little line, this little guy over here that's called step over. Step over will execute this particular line and move you to the next line. So essentially, it's going to set the denominator to 4 for ARR0. If I actually wanted to jump into the fractions code to take a look to see what it's doing inside of set denominator, I would end up using step into, okay? That would actually jump me into the fraction.java it would jump me into the fraction.java code where I would be able to see that. I don't really want to do that in this situation. I just want it to execute that line. So I'm going to go ahead and just say step over. And then what you notice is that both these denominators ended up becoming yellow, because if you notice, both of them ended up being 4. Okay. The reason for that is because, again, both F1 and array sub 0 are pointing to the same object. So when we ask that particular object to set its denominator, it is going to set that denominator to be 4, okay? And that's about it. That's what I want to show you guys here. Oh, one more thing. Let's go ahead and show you a array index out of bounds exception. So the way I'm going to do that is very simply by stopping this and coming back to this Java thing. All right, there are lots of different exceptions that Java can potentially raise. The most popular one that you're going to be getting right now is null pointer exceptions. Array index out of bounds exceptions is also a possibility. Later on, you might get things like file not found exception or other types of exceptions like class cast exceptions or something like that. But all of them have very specific reasons for why they occur. Okay, and it's essentially Java telling you, hey, there's something here that's going wrong that I want you to investigate. Okay, so let me, to raise an array index out of bounds exception, it's really easy. What I'm going to do is, rather than saying array new fraction 10, I'm going to actually try and access the 10th element in this array. And this time I'm actually just going to run it. So we'll go ahead and run. And then what you'll notice here is we get array index out of bounds exception, and you actually get the little number 10 over here, right? You see that? So that 10 is essentially telling us, hey, this is the number that you ended up placing. This is the number that for the index that you tried to access. So if I were to change this to maybe say 15 and then run this again, you would end up noticing that that is the number that it's giving you there. Okay, it's not really telling you the size; it's telling you more of this is the number that went bad. Okay, and the reason that that's useful is because most of the time you're not going to be going to a particular number, but you might have a variable, right? You might have a variable like, let's say, num, and num, you might not necessarily know what num is. Let's say that we ended up setting it to be 15 over here, right? And so by doing that, it's kind of letting us know, hey, you tried to access the 15th element, okay? Just in case you weren't sure what num was, it was 15. And we also kind of get the line as in terms of where that occurred, okay? So again, remember just with arrays, right? Even though there's 10 elements, it starts at 0 and goes all the way to 9, right? That's going to end up covering those 10 elements, and then that's about it, okay? A couple more things I just want to kind of highlight is sometimes you end up messing around with these windows, right? You end up maybe closing some of these things because you don't really want them. You want this whole thing to be up here. The easiest thing for you to do is if you are in just a straight coding mode, you could just double click. You could just double click the tab or file to kind of have that be the only file that you end up seeing on the screen. If you want to go back to a regular perspective, you can just double click on it. And the other important thing is that if you ended up losing some of these windows, the easiest thing for you to do is to go to perspective and then say reset perspective, right? It's going to ask you if you want to go back to your defaults. You say yes, and then you'll go back to your defaults. And so it'll just kind of bring everything back to how it was originally. Okay, so that's going to work both for Java and the debug mode. In case you want to, let's say we want to go back here in terms of how we want it. If we want to reset kind of where everything was sized, something like that, you can go ahead and do that, and then you can see that everything ended up moving on. All right, so hope this was useful. Make sure to like it or comment on it, since this is really just for you guys. Let me know if there's any questions that you have, and I'll try and solve them. All right, thanks, guys.